Welcome inside the parlor, where it's cooled off a little bit at night, even though we've had these magnificent days, sunny throughout September and October here in Canada, so I've pulled out this classic to warm up in. Do you know, there's two ways you can kill a football club. Nice cheery start to the show. One of them is sort of a dramatic, rapid deterioration. You could do that with, say, a fraudulent owner, a surefire way to cause all sorts of problems and kill your club. But there's also a more slow, silent, and insidious type of killer, and that is complacency, which usually is derived from arrogance, ego, and a sense of entitlement. You have no idea how many times I've seen this play out here in North America. And the worst symptom of a dying football club is apathy. Because in an instant gratification world, when your fans become apathetic, they are gone. They've moved on to something else. That's worse than anger, because at least if you're angry, you're there and you're venting your anger. I bring this up because I feel this fear that apathy is creeping in. Now look at me, I'm a hardcore Villa guy. I was not excited to get up on Sunday morning at 6 a.m. my time to watch Chelsea when I really should have. Normally, on game day, I get this instant pang of excitement in my stomach, and I wake up out of bed and I leap to the couch to get ready to watch the game. I'm not feeling that right now, and that worries me. And this is a potentially defining week for our owners. We're going to find out exactly how engaged they are, how plugged in and in tune they are with what's happening, and also see just exactly how motivated they are and whether they're ready to stick with the status quo or whether it's time for a massive shakeup at Aston Villa Football Club. Let's dive in. Villa 0, Chelsea 2. Here's the GIF that best summarizes how I felt during the game and how I reacted afterwards. I'm still seeing stars. Now, before the game even kicked off, we got some very welcome and frankly surprising news that Douglas Luiz had signed a contract extension. Who saw that coming? We thought he was off to Arsenal at the end of the summer window, and now we know he's not just going to walk away for free in either January or next summer. And, he's still growing into the best version of himself. He can now focus on his football. And I think there's more good things to come from him. So his good play of late on the field has been rewarded with a contract off of it. And that's positive in a very bleak and quite frankly uninspiring period in this Aston Villa era we find ourselves in. I'm not going to bring this up anymore because I've brought it up so many times, and I promise after this show, I'm not going to talk about this. But I don't think Aston Villa's problems are down to coaching exclusively. I think the club's problems surround process, and specifically the process of decision-making. And again, I hate to revisit history, but the more I think about Dean Smith's demise at Villa Park, the more I'm starting to wonder whether or not he was somehow a threat or there was some resentment towards him somehow because of his popularity, because of his Villa roots, and because he's the first manager in a very, very long time to clearly articulate what the culture of the club should look like. And that was infused into the academy, into the first team, all around the place. And it was surrounding three very simple principles: togetherness, fearlessness, and being prepared. It's weird when you think back to these things, but there were a series of decisions that felt like they were kind of undermining Smith, starting with the classification from manager to head coach. That distinction was suddenly made very clear. You're the head coach. John Terry leaves. Then his longtime assistant, Richard O'Kelly, leaves. Did he jump or was he pushed? Whose decision was that? We'll never know. In comes Aaron Danks and Austin McPhee. How much say did Dean Smith have on those appointments, or were they just thrust upon him? He didn't have Jack Grealish through injury for the back half of that 2020-2021 season, then didn't have him at all. And ultimately, he was made to be the fall guy for a very imbalanced squad. And I don't think he had a whole lot of say on Buendia, Bailey, or Ings. Maybe he did. We'll never know. Nobody ever knows because we don't know where the decisions are made in this club. We were told when Dean Smith was fired that the club was not progressing and the results simply weren't where they needed to be over that period of time, which included a lot of injury problems. Fair enough. But over almost an exactly the same period of time, just under a calendar year, the club has actually progressed less since Steven Gerrard took over, and with a larger wage bill and older players who quite frankly are playing a far less attractive style of football. Now, I had heard that Christian Purslow was already floating around his circle, that he was starting to get tired of Smith already after that very fateful Wolves loss at home. But why does it feel now like one manager is getting a longer leash than the previous one, who probably had a better record, a better wage structure, and a more attractive style of play? And when I hear the quote from Mr. Purslow that the thought of firing Steven Gerrard has never crossed my mind, well, there you have exhibit A of arrogance, ego, and sense of entitlement. Because if you truly care about the football club, you should be gravely concerned about the progression of the club over the same period of time than the previous manager. Meanwhile, the Pochettino rumors have suddenly been revived by numerous sources with varying degrees of credibility. I'm here to tell you right now, Mauricio Pochettino would instantly transform Villa the minute he walks through the door. I've actually gone back and rewatched All or Nothing Tottenham to see what happened. And my assessment, and the assessment of some of my Spurs fans' friends, was the hangover from the Champions League loss was insurmountable. And when he left and Mourinho came in, Mourinho also couldn't crack Tottenham back on to what they were, even with the injuries. But it was just a very odd time. And I'd be shocked if people said, well, we don't want Pochettino because of that. He'd taken them to the Champions League weeks, basically, before being dismissed. And if I look at him versus Thomas Tuchel, I'm taking Pochettino every single time. Tuchel has his own demons and has been around the block a few times at several different clubs. Tuchel, far more personality-wise like Gerrard. Pochettino, far more like Dean Smith. You know, the other thing I noticed in that All or Nothing Tottenham was Daniel Levy and how he operated. How he's kind of like that executive that loves playing fantasy football and talking about football with managers. And I could tell every time he had a discussion with Mourinho about a footballer, Mourinho wanted to get out of the room because he knows this guy has absolutely no clue. He's an executive. He's not a football guy. Does that sound familiar? So if Pochettino were to come in, I'm telling you, this guy changes everything. He's from the Bielsa school. Hell, Bielsa knocked on his door one morning as a 14-year-old at 2 a.m, said to his family, "Can I see your kid and meet him? I've driven all this way." He goes in the backyard, plays football with Bielsa. So he's come through the academy and knows the value of the academy and the pride in promoting kids and increasing their value and integrating them into the team. He's a front foot footballing coach. Want to attack all the time. Want the ball. Does that sound attractive and exciting to you? I have a major Spurs fan in my office. And when I told him about the links to Aston Villa that were being whispered, he was gutted because he always felt that Poch would come back to Spurs because he loved Spurs. He said he wanted to come back. He still has a kid in London. This is maybe a stumbling block. But I'm telling you, the fact that he's been out for as long as he has from the game is one thing. The fact that he's available as an unemployed manager is quite remarkable. Bring him in. All right, let's get to the game now. And there were undeniably positives. And they weren't just subjective positives. They were objective positives, as you'll see in the statistical story. But one thing that is so confounding to me, and I've supported other teams that have had this weird trait of always seeming to rise to the occasion when the good teams came to town and then drop to the level of the poorer teams. It is so confounding and frustrating, and that's kind of how it's felt for Aston Villa when you think about Manchester City and their first half performance, at least against Chelsea. But there were some good things. McGinn and Ramsey occasionally joining in the box, releasing, making up numbers, having attempts on goal. Your eights have to score. Doesn't matter what kind of system you play, you need goals from midfield. My question is, why did it take until now to get to that phase where McGinn's actually getting into the box? And with McGinn, he was replaced by Phil Coutinho, which I thought was interesting. And when Phil Coutinho had dropped a little deeper into midfield and was surrounded by all these other players, it was very congested, he was forced to move the ball more quickly. Because the biggest issue for me with Phil Coutinho, undeniably elite footballing IQ, incredible quality. I'm sorry, there is no debate. This guy's a footballer. Too many times, though, we pass the responsibility to him. Now go do it, Phil, because you're the big star on this team, and that does not work. It's predictable. It's easy to defend. Another positive, though, I thought, Ollie Watkins on the left-hand side. This solves a lot of problems, having Ollie Watkins on the left-hand side with potentially Ramsey overlapping or Young overlapping. He became a provider quite often. I think I'd like to see that again this coming week. Yikes, look at that moment right there. I couldn't believe it when that ball went over the wall and then under the bar. We'll talk about it later, but this is the Holy Trinity show, the three big issues or moments that defined Aston Villa 0 and Chelsea 2. We'll start with the key statistics. I was mentioning that objectively, Villa was the better team. And here's why. I focused on corners. Not a great reflection on your attacking prowess or endeavor, but it's dramatic. Every single aspect, with the exception of accurate passes, went Villa's way, creating 4 big chances. Remember, they created none in several games this year. And yeah, their possession took a beating in the second half, but 7 corners to 1. Can we ever score from one of these? So there you have it. I mean, in black and white, Aston Villa was the better team on Sunday statistically. And what's so frustrating is we are going to see, and we have seen, better Chelsea teams than that one. I mean, I'm not convinced with Aubameyang at this stage. Kai Havertz is in and out. Reece James didn't even play. I've never understood the fascination or the signing of Cucurella. He was anonymous in that game, apart from his hair, and he was dragged at halftime, and Thiago Silva is somehow still hanging on at his age. So we are going to see better Chelsea teams. In fact, I think that team was more beatable than the team we actually beat at the end of the 2020-2021 season. Remember the game with Bertrand Traore? Oh, Bertrand Traore. We're winning games against Chelsea with players like Anwar El Ghazi and Bertrand Traore, which feels like another dimension ago during that wizardly period of Bertrand Traore. Big issue number 3, debut decisions. The very first thing I thought of when I saw this goal was, could Big Emmy have taken one step forward earlier and maybe snuffed out the whole thing before it even got to Mason Mount? Now, I'm not blaming him, and not a great play from Tyrone Mings either. We'll talk about that later. But I've complained often about goalkeeper's starting position being very deep, and you just watch at the start of this that he is very deep in his goal, like he was on the Erling Haaland goal for Manchester City and several other times this year where he's rooted to his goal line almost, and he doesn't come off his line for such a big man who's brave and a leader. And I wonder if this is a recurring issue that he and Big Cuts talk about. Because if he takes one giant stride forward, then I think the danger is over. Is there a sunlight issue at this time of day at that end of the ground between the sun and the shadows? I don't know. It's just an observation I've had. And that was the first thought that went through my mind. Why couldn't he have come off his line a little bit sooner? This goal for me almost defies physics. I mean, the ball is up and down so fast. It starts so high, then it drops so quickly, and it has enough power to get by everyone, but it's still down to Emi Martinez. The wall takes the near post always and forever. The goalkeeper takes the back post. I don't know why he doesn't trust his wall. He cheats over in behind his wall, and then he also pulls his arms in. If he had just stayed where his starting position was, he probably just would have tipped it over the crossbar. And of course, the foul that led to the free kick had to be given to Tyrone Mings just to heap more misery on the big man. I mean, if you're 6'5", you're not allowed to make a tackle. Tyrone Mings is not allowed to make a tackle. Every single foul against him seems soft as shite, like this one, and the one at Nottingham Forest. You watch that one again, too. Weak, soft foul. I don't know what the answer is for him. He is victimized for being 6'5". I guess he just isn't allowed to get into a tackle, or he's just going to have to back off and be super patient. Big issue number 2 is Kepa keeping. In a league and a game with such fine margins, and by the way, that expression fine margins or fine lines used by a lot of under-fire coaches, but in a game where one goalkeeper stands on his head while the other stands on his line, well, that could be the difference in the outcome. And Graham Potter preferred Kepa in this game because of how good he is with the ball at his feet, whereas Mendy is kind of thought of as the cat-like shot stopper who has had some suspect moments with the ball at his feet. And what happens? The former comes up with an absolute showstopper against JJ. I mean, this is an incredible save. If JJ goes 2 inches to the left, it's 1-1. And I thought, well, maybe he goes the other way. There is a Chelsea defender standing there. If he does go the other way, the entire bottom corner is open on the other side of the goal. But this is what happens when you're struggling for production right now. You finally get in a position to shoot as a number 8 and get a clean strike on goal. And Kepa digs it out with his fingertips. The Ings chance, which was beautifully orchestrated, first by Ramsey with the penetrating ball, and then Bailey to not only get on the end of it, but then lose his man and whip it in. It's a great chance, and take nothing away from Kepa's reaction. He makes a fantastic reaction save. His reaction was better than Ings, because as a striker, you're always taught to head the ball down. And if any of that ball goes down, even just a little bit, it's 1-1 there. It's not the only time we missed a header in this game, by the way. How about Bailey at the back post? If he got over that one, it would have been 1-1 there. Ollie Watkins also had a sitter in the second half, unopposed in the penalty area, and he flashes it way wide. Are we ever going to see a player in an Aston Villa uniform score with his head ever again? I wonder. And the number 1 big issue and defining moment of Villa 0, Chelsea 2 was the Mings mistake. I spoke earlier about how maybe Emi Martinez could have had a better starting position and maybe pounced before Mason Mount could. And in defense to Tyrone Mings, the ball definitely deflected before it got to his head, then it spun off weird. I wondered about the shadows and the light at that end of the ground, but why do these calamities always have to happen to one of the nicest guys, an intelligent, articulate leader who really we should be very proud wears Aston Villa's strip? He owned it. He apologized to his teammates at halftime. He got on with it without looking rattled. But you can't ignore that he's victimized by these kinds of calamities time and time again, and he gets murdered for it on social media. Like, if this happened to a real ass who nobody liked, then no problem. The ass is the person who keeps going hard after him when he makes these mistakes, the kind of guy who could never kick a ball in anger. That's the kind of guy you want to see victimized by a mistake like that. But it never works out that way. It happens to Tyrone Mings, and to be honest with you, it hurts. And so, 6 minutes into a game that Villa were already on top of with the crowd behind them against a team that was coming off a short week and had to rotate because of Champions League, you absolutely gift wrap a goal and the entire mood in the stadium changes, knowing that you're now going to have to chase a goal, something Villa has been incapable of doing so many times over the last couple of years. Think about the psychological difference between going in at halftime at 0-0 and 0-1, remembering that Villa hadn't conceded a first half goal at home this year. You have to be good at something. Either you need to score buckets of goals at one end, or you need to be able to keep a clean sheet at the other. And the big worry I have for Aston Villa right now is that it just seems like they're incapable of being either. I tell you, this gets harder and harder to do each and every week as we look for glimmers of positivity, but the record at Villa Park now falling to 7 points out of a possible 15. The VAR decision to not send off Ben Chilwell, in my opinion, was absolutely scandalous, because if the referee had sent him off, do you honestly believe VAR would have overturned it? He was not in control. He was late, his stud straight into the ankle, and yet I was actually kind of relieved that Chelsea weren't down to 10 men, remembering how difficult a time Villa had at Leeds. Watkins and Mings still struggling. Austin McPhee's set-piece duties now -4 off a direct free kick against the top 6, 1 point out of a possible 9. I don't know about you, but this feels like a defining week ahead for Aston Villa, with the first of 2 West London opponents on Thursday at Fulham and Craven Cottage. First time Villa's been there since the expansion. Fulham coming off a 2-2 draw with suddenly unbeatable Bournemouth. Alexander Mitrovic back on the score sheet and in the squad after his ankle injury. And normally you'd look at this fixture and you'd say, oh, well, it's Fulham away, probably odds on for a result, maybe even a win. Unfortunately, we've already lost to one newly promoted side away, and we could barely muster a draw against the other. If anything, it's the Cottagers going, that's a wounded and fragile Villa team. We need to take advantage on our home patch and maybe solidify our place in the top third of the table. A Villa win would put us level on points with Fulham. And you do wonder how much rotation Steven Gerrard will look at, with Brentford looming on Sunday as well, and Villa on one fewer day rest than Fulham, who played on Saturday. And if you are being positive and Villa do manage to pull off a full pull this week and take 6 points out of 6, well, suddenly they're in a really good position in the top half of the table, thanks to some really weird results and a lot of draws around them. But are you feeling confident about being able to do that this week? Because I'm not. As cheerful as this show has been already, I am concerned about the upcoming run of fixtures that features only 2 teams that are not currently in the top 10 of the table. That's Fulham on Thursday and Wolves later. The rest of them, all top 10 sides. The opportunity to accumulate points against the perceived bottom half teams of the table has come and gone. We need to stay positive, I suppose. Until Friday, be well. And as always, up the mighty Villa.